I almost forgot what to say. Do you know where we are, what we're doing, and what today is, and all that stuff?
Well, it is still Saturday, so that means that today we're getting into our
Q&A Saturday on a Saturday.
That's right. And what are we Qing and Aing today?
We are in the book of Daniel.
Daniel, yes.
And we're covering chapters 1 through 5. And I have a bunch of notes.
I bet. This has been an odd set of chapters in the Bible. And not very it doesn't like go together real well.
Well, that and some of it is taking place during events that we already read, and then some of it is taking place after. Yeah. And it's very weird.
And a lot of it does not mesh up very well.
Right. It's not cohesive.
So I am interested in this Q&A.
Okay.
I think that there's a lot that we need to cover.
There's a lot we need to cover. I'll try to talk fast and keep it brief. But
yeah. Well, I do want to apologize. This didn't go out this morning, but we are getting it out on the right day. So let's get into this.
Okie dokie. All right, let us get into the book of Daniel.
The book of Daniel.
Yes.
Yes.
And first, we're going to just talk more about the book itself.
Okay.
Okay, because I did not go over all of my notes for that. And also, there's stuff that it's not a horrible thing if I repeat myself.
Sure. No, I mean, you never know when someone's joining us and what they haven't heard and what they have heard. But, you know, when we're talking about stuff that is ancient and we need to go over it, like you said, it doesn't hurt to cover it a couple of times.
Well, not only that, but sometimes it makes better sense once it's in a little bit more context.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Let's talk again about the book's authorship, because we mentioned that more than once, and I think we had some of our dates we questioned. So the book of Daniel was authored during the 2nd century BCE, likely around 167 to 163 BCE.
Okay.
But it is set during the 6th century BCE, so the 500s, the negative 500s.
Yeah, so about 400 years difference.
It's generally accepted that the book of Daniel originated as a collection of Aramaic court tales, which were later expanded by the Hebrew revelations. And let us not forget that I think it was chapter 3 was the one that Daniel wasn't in. Is that correct?
It was 2 or 3. I can't remember exactly myself.
I think it was 3.
Yeah.
So that one was almost definitely by itself while these stories were circulating.
Okay.
So some of the other ones might have like kind of been together or circulating at the same time.
Sure.
But that one was alone.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
The author or editor was probably an educated Jewish person, knowledgeable in Greek learning and of high standing in his own community. So we've said all that, but now that we've read some, it's like, oh, okay, that makes some sense.
Right. Right.
The prophet Daniel lived in the 6th century. During this approximate period, I'm going to name some other things that were happening around the time that Daniel was supposed to have lived.
I have a question here. Is it do scholars tend to agree that Daniel is a real and actual character? Or
he's a character, not a person.
Okay, that's kind of how it feels. So I wouldn't attribute a lot of like actual things to this person based on what we've read, because it does seem very fictional,
right?
Like more so than some of the other characters, you know. So
yeah, he's an amalgamation of several different legends.
Got it. Okay.
And his name was chosen because it means like of God or high view by God or some shit like that.
So it's generally we can just accept that this is a beyond the fiction of the Bible itself. This specifically is actual fiction in the Bible. Correct. That is based on ideas that they wanted to portray. Correct.
Now, if you were having this conversation with a Christian, they would argue with you about it because they take this as actual things that happened, and they would have to take it as actual things that happened because of some of the
Christian takes on what happened.
Well, the Christian takes and the prophecies.
Right.
So they're like, no, he's giving prophecies here. We haven't got to all of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the book gets crazier as we go. And the Christians are like, absolutely this happened. Absolutely this dude was real. And absolutely he said these things.
I just don't even on the small amount of knowledge that we have on the Bible, I don't see how you can read these chapters and come to that conclusion, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me how Christians are like, this is real and this has happened and blah, blah, blah.
They're not reading the things that we're reading, and they're not getting the extra notes. Right. And they're not getting the whole story because they're not reading it straight through.
No, I get it. But somebody that put together their religion did.
Right.
There are people in their religion that have read these notes and do know these things. Sure. And yet they still say that they're real.
But the people that do that are the ones that are in power. Why would they change the system? Much like centrist Democrats.
No, I completely...
Status quo is awesome.
I completely agree with what you're saying. It's just that I can't see how, unless you're in this for nefarious reasons and want to, you have a reason to share bad information. It just doesn't make sense to me why someone would, and I get that there's money behind Christianity
I hear what you're saying,
like that.
But I think that you're coming at it, of course, from your atheist perspective.
That's true.
Somebody who is coming at it already believing that this stuff happened, as one book foretells another, it has a self-validating coinage.
Yeah, and if you choose to look at what you're looking, if you only look at what you're looking for, you're going to see what you're looking for.
Well, that and there's a place where I'm not even there yet, but there's a place where in the thing where Daniel and company, his friends, get locked in the furnace because they wouldn't bow to the statue, right?
Right.
There is a place in Isaiah that talks about it's a prophecy. You will walk through the fire and not be burned.
Oh.
And if you are a Christian, how can you not be like, whoa, dude?
Right, but see, the way I take that is I look at when this was written. It was written in the 200 BCE time frame, 167 or whatever, and I'm looking at it and I'm saying to myself, oh, so they knew about this prophecy. They took these ideas and they made them work by taking this fictional character and making it fit these gaps that they needed to fill.
Okay, but you're coming at it with me telling you this dude is a fictional character.
I get it.
These people don't know that.
Right. No, I understand.
So they're like, whoa, this real person Isaiah prophesied that this real person Daniel would and his friends would go through these things. And of course, because fire is used both times and the situation is similar, it must be that this is what Isaiah was talking about. All period. Right. The end. It's self-fulfilling.
No, I get it. It fills that whole cherry-picking aspect of the Bible to me. Like, that's exactly what I'm talking about when I say that Christians cherry-pick the Bible, is that they make narratives fit what they want to see.
Absolutely. And that's why you can't argue with them, because you're trying to tell them that the thing that they believe that they know is true because the proof is in the circular logic.
Right.
You're trying to take that away from them without taking the circle away.
Well, and I would even argue that the New Testament is largely cherry picking things from the Old Testament to make a new religion.
I haven't read it yet, so I don't know for sure, but I get the sense that you're not wrong. Okay, so I was going over a list of things that were happening during the time that, quote unquote, the prophet Daniel was living over in Babylon.
Okay.
Yep. So we're going to pretend he's real in canon for all intents and purposes. This is what was going on.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
So construction began on the Acropolis in Athens.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. The Mayan civilization was flourishing in Mexico.
Okay.
Aesop wrote his fables.
Ooh,
right?
Okay.
Confucius and Buddha lived during this time. Okay.
Yeah.
Greek art began to truly excel, and the Greeks introduced the olive tree to Italy.
Okay.
The Phoenicians made the first known sea journey around Africa.
Huh.
So all of that was going on. The world was like awakening to the realization that it was larger than they thought.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting context, because it puts in perspective a lot of the things. Like, when we're reading the Bible and we're in these stories, it's very narrowly focused and it's hard to see what that other stuff is. And it's neat to see what else is happening.
Yeah, when I read that, I got goosebumps, not because any of that is particularly earth-shattering, right, but because it put the world together in context for me. And that's the thing that was always missing for me in history classes in school, and why I hated history. I couldn't understand how it all fit together. Right.
And it makes you understand, I think, if you're Christian, right, and you're listening to us for some odd reason, and I encourage that actually, but if you are a Christian and listening to this, it takes you out of that bubble of everything is centered around Israel and Yahweh and this little bubble in the Middle East.
Yeah,
and takes you out and says, hey, this is what history is happening right now when this is happening.
There's whole other civilizations.
There's a whole fucking world out there.
Yeah.
That's happening outside of what you're dealing with.
That have nothing to do with your little L.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Okay. So Babylon's first attack on Jerusalem came in 605 BCE.
Sure.
During the reign of the Judean king Joachim, whose name I always mispronounce. And he was placed on the throne, of course, by the Pharaoh of Egypt. So he was a puppet king.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
And we've gone over this material before in other chapters.
Right, but not in Daniel yet.
Right.
Sure.
So Nebuchadnezzar came against Jerusalem because the Pharaoh of Egypt invaded Babylon. In response, Nebuchadnezzar defeated the Egyptians at Karshemish and then pursued their fleeing army all the way down to the Sinai. Along the way, or on the way back, one or the other, he subdued Jerusalem, which had been loyal to the Pharaoh of Egypt. Right. So we had been hearing about this from the other side. Like now we're learning about things from the Babylonian position.
Right. And that makes a lot of sense. That's kind of what we came to the conclusion of as we were reading through, but it was definitely focused on it from a different perspective. Yeah. And we were hearing very much the Babylonian side of it as opposed
no, we were hearing the not the Babylonian side.
Well, we were hearing from Jeremiah and Isaiah or whoever, but Jeremiah, who was like a traitor.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and so he was speaking to let's bow to Babylon when the other people around him were still wanting to work with Egypt, and that and they were getting in trouble with quote unquote God for working with Egypt. So we saw that they were working with Egypt, but the winds were blowing towards Babylon through that prophet at the time. Right.
But they were in Jerusalem, so we were seeing the war, even though we were seeing it through the eyes of a Babylonian double agent.
Right.
We were in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now we're in Babylon, looking at it the other way.
Right.
So that's what I meant. It's just different, seeing the same events from different standing points.
So I'm assuming Daniel was, hypothetically, this fictional character was probably part of the first Exodus.
He was.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So much like Ezekiel. Okay.
Yeah. This campaign of Nebuchadnezzar was interrupted suddenly when he heard of his father's death and ran back to Babylon to secure his succession to the throne. So that's why Nebuchadnezzar dropped everything and took off. Okay. Because, times were rough back then. If you weren't there to call dibs on the phone or on the throne. Yeah. Somebody else gonna take it.
Right.
So he had to run back home and,
secure that shit. Yeah.
He traveled about 500 miles in 2 weeks, which was remarkable speed for travel in that time. So he was booking it.
Yeah.
Okay. In keeping with the usual practice among conquerors in ancient times, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar plundered the temple of the conquered people, carried off its sacred objects, and placed them in his own temple, which we know.
Right.
In this way, Nebuchadnezzar demonstrated his belief that Babylonian gods were superior to the God of the Jews. So it wasn't just about looting. It was also about
destroying that God.
Yeah, showing the power that he had. Because every king believed himself to be the entire ruler of the whole world.
Right.
And therefore God-like.
Sure.
So they could not have
Which is
other
why
gods.
I was calling bullshit on a lot of the stories in Daniel so far. Because it just doesn't track in my mind.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. So this was a really low time for Judah and for God's people in general.
Sure.
It seemed that the God of Israel lost out to the gods of Assyria, Egypt, and Babylon. The book of Daniel shows God vindicating himself at a time when the conquest of Israel might have brought God's reputation into disgrace.
Right.
So the
Propaganda.
reason that I wanted to read that particular sentence to get there was because we were talking about reasons why Daniel was written. And we agreed that it was to reunite the people and excite them, but it was also to show that God is not done.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And to try to, the rallying cry for God, not just the people.
Yeah. They had to portray strength from their God in the moment when he was weakest somehow. And this fictional character of Daniel fills that gap at some level.
What's interesting is that by making it seem in their minds like God made them lose on purpose, that did make them come together. And that did be the making a good reason for them getting beat and defeated.
Right.
Gave them the impetus to come back together and to keep the story going so that we are still talking about it today.
Right. Yeah.
So that is pretty fucking amazing.
Sure.
I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just amazing.
Well, and I think that if you talk, like, these are stories that they're really well written. They are very feel good, right? Like if you love your God, that is Yahweh, right? And somebody tells you these stories from Daniel, they're very feel good stories, right? Sure. And if you don't have the larger context, if you don't study it in depth as to when this was written, why it was written, how it was written, etc., it doesn't really matter. It's just that, like, rallying point for your God, right?
Like, you don't need to know, these were actually Aramaic stories.
Sure.
These were fables.
Right.
And all we did was change the name of the dude.
Right.
Yeah. So we've talked before about how this book can be divided into two parts, and we're still in the first part,
right?
Which is a set of 6 court tales, and that is chapters 1 through 6. So on Monday, we will finish up that first part.
Yeah, okay? We will.
Yeah.
And with a bit of a roar, from what I understand.
From what I understand, yeah. These were mostly written in Aramaic. Okay. Yeah. So just put that out there. The second bit is 4 apocalyptic visions, which are chapters 7 through 12, and they are written mostly in Hebrew. Okay. Now, the Deuterocanonical books contain 3 additional sections,
right,
which we have talked about, and we're very excited to eventually read.
Yeah, which I think we discussed doing them at the end of this book, right?
Yes.
Possibly?
Yes. Just squeeze them on in there and pretend they're in our Bible.
Sure.
Yeah. It's the Prayer of Azariah and Song of the 3 Holy Children. Number 2 is Susanna. And number 3 is Bel and the Dragon.
Okay.
This book, as we've seen a little bit, but it's going to get worse. This book is filled with monsters, angels, and numerology drawn from a wide range of sources.
Ooh, it's going to be fun.
It's going to be so fun. Yeah. Because we've already seen just the fact that these stories are based on Aramaic fables.
Yeah.
We already know that these first ones are stories.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So when it says numerous sources, it's like, well, we know one.
Well, I think the mere fact that the first 6 chapters are written in Aramaic and the last chapters are written in Hebrew, right? It kind of detracts from the whole continuity of the story too.
Yes.
Right? And when you're studying it, when you're looking at it from an outside perspective.
From a scholarly
because why would that be the case, right?
Right.
It's the case because this is a fiction that has been written and put together.
Right. Exactly.
So it's obvious to me, but
same.
We have to pretend like this is like this part of functional Christianity. So.
Well, and that's why I said, for all intents and purposes, within canon, this is the way this story goes.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to present this as this is what happened.
Right. No, and I feel like if I was to sit down with someone who was a biblical scholar or someone who was Christian who had read these bits, I'd have to be like, can we just agree that these are fables, these are stories, right?
Because they are of Aramaic source.
And if we're having a discussion about, the Bible and Christianity in general, I want you to be able to defend your faith on reasonable assumptions about things, right? And you have to reasonably assume, based on the information that we do have about this book, that there's something kind of fucked up about it.
I get the sense, and I'm talking completely out of my ass here, I get the sense that Jewish readers of the Old Testament would probably agree with you.
Right.
But Christians are the problem.
Because it's become a very important aspect in their New Testament.
Yeah.
So, I get it.
So, really, it just depends who you're talking to.
Right.
But let's get into the chapters themselves.
Sure. Sorry, I know I've been talking a lot.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, you asking questions and adding your opinions is what these are all about. So, in chapter 1, I called that Intro to Daniel and Co. Who Won't Eat.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so chapter 1, I think we said at the time, and now we know for sure, was apparently added as an introduction to the tales when they were collected around the end of the 3rd century BCE.
Yeah, it was very ill-placed.
Yeah.
It was not. It was just like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
There they are.
Yeah, chapter 1 is just like, it's an intro.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
The education of Daniel and his friends, we're going to talk about that a little bit, okay?
Sure.
This chapter tells how Daniel and his 3 companions were among captives taken by Nebuchadnezzar from Jerusalem to Babylon to be trained in Babylonian wisdom.
Right.
Okay, so we do know that. And we do know that this chapter was clearly added on later.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Nebuchadnezzar demonstrated that he was a wise administrator and a shrewd tactician. And I hadn't thought of this perspective. Taking these young men as hostages reminded the people back at Jerusalem that they should not revolt against the recently imposed Babylonian rule.
Because they have hostages, essentially?
Yeah, they're like, we have your brightest kids.
Right.
Your best and brightest are up here with us.
Yeah.
So y'all probably want to fucking chillax.
Sure.
And I hadn't thought of it from that perspective.
Well, and not only that, but once you have the best and brightest, if you can bring them to your side, right? You have some manipulation tactics that you can implement.
And that's the part that we were introduced to,
right,
was the indoctrination that they were receiving.
Sure.
And so we saw the whole conversion process part, but I hadn't thought of it that it wasn't the only reason, though.
They're also hostages.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. So I like finding different reasons and different thought processes. Yeah. I just think it's really cool. So, they were each renamed. So
right.
Daniel's name originally meant God is my judge. His name was changed to Belshazzar, which is Bel's prince.
Okay.
Okay. Hananiah was originally beloved by the Lord, and his name was changed to Shadrach, which means illumined by sun god.
Okay.
Mishael meant who is as God, was changed to Mishash, who is like Shash, a Babylonian goddess corresponding to Ishtar or Venus.
So these names are all based on like Babylonian gods, which is very interesting because it's almost like setting up this fight between Babylonian gods and Yahweh, essentially, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of cool imagery, and I applaud them for using that, I guess. That's actually pretty cool.
It's a neat and easy symbolism.
Right, yeah.
And then the last guy, Azariah, his name meant the Lord is my help, and it was changed to Abednego, which means servant of Nego, whoever the hell that guy is.
Which has got to be something to do with Babylonian gods.
Right.
I'm sure.
I would imagine.
Right.
So, okay, so these guys were told, hey, you got to come up here and eat. Now, what we didn't realize or overlooked, I don't remember if it was actually in print or not.
Right.
These guys weren't just given food. They were given the same food that the king was eating. So they were getting all the choicest meat and bread and everything. Like they were given high class food.
Okay.
Okay. And that was to help ease the transition and make them softer and make them more pliable to the indoctrination.
Part of the manipulation process.
Yes,
right.
Yes. So in not eating the food offered by the king, this was a big deal.
Right.
You know? And something else that was pointed out by one of the apologists, significantly, the root of sin goes back to eating forbidden food. And these guys were like, I'm not going to eat the forbidden food.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, I got to say that.
Yeah, sure.
So, because this book, Christians point to this as these boys were so perfect in the way they're supposed to behave.
Right.
We should all use them as our role model.
Sure.
Always stand firm against temptation. as opposed to what Eve, that horrible bitch, did, right? So the purpose of the food, names, and education was not just an effort at total indoctrination. It was also a method to tempt them into actively letting go of their old ways and actively embracing the ways of Babylon.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Daniel and his friends considered the king's food defiled for at least 3 reasons. And we wondered, like, what the fuck's a big deal? Just fucking eat it. I don't understand.
Right.
Right? Well, here's why.
Okay.
They were like, actually, but no.
Right.
First of all, it probably wasn't kosher. And it was probably sacrificed to idols. So
okay.
it was not spiritually clean food.
Sure.
Also, eating the king's food implied fellowship with Babylon's cultural system, which, you know, was a heathen king and his idols.
Right.
Because back then, like, food and meals, it
very intertwined.
Yeah. Well, it meant community.
Right.
So they were like, no offense, but I deny your offer of friendship and community. So it was a polite snub. So what they did, though, instead of just saying, no, thanks, bitch, and go on a hunger strike, what they did was they talked to their guard and was like, hey, I'm not trying to get you in trouble or anything, because guard's like, dude, just eat your shit. I'm not getting fired over you.
Right.
And then dudes were like, okay, but we just actually only want the vegetables and the nuts and grains and shit.
Yeah.
If you could do that. And guard was like, absolutely not. And they were like, please. And he was like, you're going to starve and be gaunt and skinny. And then my ass is getting fired. So fuck you, no.
Right.
And they were like, okay. Just give us a week to eat this.
To show you that we
meat.
can still do it.
Right. Yeah. And so that's what happened.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
And the vegetables was what they said in the story, but it actually referred to all kinds of grains and plants, not strictly vegetables. Okay. And basically what they were requesting was a vegetarian diet.
Right.
And, you know, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Daniel had a long, successful career in the worst of circumstances and was still a person of importance even after the Babylonian Empire had fallen.
In this fictional take.
Yes, sorry. All right, so that's the end of chapter 1. I said all I got to say about chapter 1, added some notes that I thought were interesting.
Sure.
Okay, so let's go on to chapter 2, the king's statue dream. Okay?
Yeah, this was interesting.
Chapter 2 is the first mention of the Chaldeans as a class of soothsayers to the king.
Okay.
I had to look up the Chaldeans, and I'm glad I did because I had a misunderstanding of them.
Okay.
Like, my understanding was that they were a tribe of smarty astronomers who got swallowed up by the Babylonians.
That was kind of my understanding as well.
And it's exactly the opposite of that. So I'm going to read what I learned about them.
Yeah.
Okay. Which fascinating for no reason other than fascinating.
Sure.
Okay, they were a Semitic-speaking people who lived in southern Babylonia, which is modern-day southern Iraq. They were originally a nomadic tribe who migrated into southern Mesopotamia around the 10th or 9th century BCE.
Okay.
They eventually established themselves as a powerful force in the region. The Chaldeans gained prominence when they established the Neo-Babylonian Empire. So they established Babylon.
Okay.
Ruling Babylonia from around 626 BCE to 539
Interesting.
BCE. Yeah.
It's interesting. So it's almost like they were fighting over what they would be referred to as, whether it be Chaldeans or Babylonians.
Yeah, well,
not so much
because they were nomadic. They were like, we're the Chaldeans. We sleep in tents and travel a lot. And then they were like, this land is great. I don't give a fuck that there's already people here. Let's settle.
Right.
I don't want to sleep in tents anymore. I'm over it.
Right.
And so then, like, the people that already lived there were like, okay, we're Babylonian. And they were like, that's what you think. And the Babylonians were like, well, I mean, but we are though.
Yeah.
And the Chaldeans were like, whatever, you can call yourselves that. And since there were more of the Babylonians, they just were like, well, I mean, you guys are kind of cool, but we're still Babylonians.
Sure.
So it's like the compromise was, we'll let you be in charge of us and live here.
Right.
But we're still fucking calling ourselves Babylonians. And the Chaldeans were like, sweet, that's an easy deal. Fine, we're all fucking Babylonians.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So the Chaldeans made significant contributions to astronomy, mathematics, and law. And I was like, tell me more.
Right.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's important to note that the term Chaldean is sometimes used interchangeably with Babylonian. which, is what I was just talking about, especially in the context of the Bible. However, while all Chaldeans were Babylonians, not all Babylonians were Chaldeans.
Interesting.
So that's how you know. Okay. The Chaldeans were Babylonians, specifically a powerful group who eventually ruled the region. It's more accurate to say that the Chaldeans rose to power in Babylonia and established the Neo-Babylonian Empire. They were a dynamic and ambitious people who managed to overtake the existing Babylonian ruling class. Okay? Because they were smart. Right. They made remarkable advancements in astronomy and mathematics, laying the foundation for much of our modern understanding of astronomy. Okay?
Got it, yeah.
They were, with regard to astronomy, they were meticulous observers of the celestial bodies, recording their movements and positions with great accuracy, like very good accuracy.
Right.
Using their detailed observations, they developed sophisticated methods to predict eclipses, the movements of planets, and other astronomical phenomena. So they were fucking smart.
Yeah.
They divided the day into 24 hours.
Wow.
The hour into 60 minutes and the minute into 60 seconds.
No shit.
A system we still use today.
Wow, that's pretty cool, actually.
I'm like, okay, Chaldeans.
Yeah.
I would live under your rule. You're smart and good.
I just something because I was kind of curious while we're sitting here talking about it, but I think part of the reason that we have them intermixed in the Bible is because one of the first famous Chaldeans to rule Babylon was Nebuchadnezzar II. So it's part of kind of the story that we're learning about here.
Right.
So,
and I didn't even realize that.
Right.
Wow.
I thought that was interesting. So that's probably why there's this confusion. They were coming to power at the same time. They were part of this community that is Babylon, but this group of Chaldeans is coming to power. Right. So that's where the confusion probably settled in a little bit with some of that.
Who is who? Yes.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
All right. So they divided the sky into constellations, forming the basic for the zodiac today.
Cool.
They developed a base 60 number system, which influenced our modern system of measuring angles, time, and geographic coordinates.
See, now I feel a little bit jealous right now because we're spending all this time talking about God and Yahweh and the Israelites, but I'd really like to talk about the Chaldeans.
Yeah, that's why I was like, I'm going to take a minute.
Right.
Yeah, so that's what we're doing here for this little section.
Yeah, no, they're so much cooler.
They're so cool, right? Like, we're supposed to be talking about chapter 2, and I'm like, I'll get there. I need to talk about the Chaldeans. They're so fucking smart.
Right.
Their mathematicians made significant progress in arithmetic and geometry, essential for their astronomical calculations and architectural endeavors.
Okay.
When the Chaldeans admitted that they could neither reveal nor interpret the king's dream, a furious Nebuchadnezzar sentenced all his wise men to death. Remember?
Yeah, I do remember they were going to chop them into pieces.
That's what he was going to do. He gave a command to destroy all the wise men. So all the wise men were Chaldeans.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But Daniel wasn't called as one of them.
Well, he was going to be murdered with them. Like that was part because the guard went to go.
But he was not called into the court. Like Nebuchadnezzar goes, "Hey, all you wise men, get up in here and tell me, what did I dream again now? And what the fuck did it mean?" And they all came running because, as you do, when your king calls, you run.
For sure.
Except Daniel didn't.
Right.
And so then he's like, fuck all of you. You're all dead. And so then he sent his guards out and, the guard found Daniel and was like, oh, okay, you're supposed to be dead, though. So that wasn't cool. Now, I found this little tidbit interesting.
Okay.
As a new king, Nebuchadnezzar perhaps used the situation to test the suitability of his father's old advisors. The dream provided him with a good reason to clean house. Which I was like, damn. Okay.
All right.
That
makes sense.
That is political intrigue that I am here for.
Now, that's we're assuming that this actually happened, right? But it's hard to... this is part of a story that was written 400 years later. And maybe something like that happened, but maybe it didn't also. Or at least not in the same way.
Here's the thing. It's really hard to separate the two.
Yeah.
Because some of this shit actually did happen. Some of these people actually did exist. Nebuchadnezzar, for example.
Right.
So it's kind of like when we talk about Solomon.
Yeah.
Do you remember Solomon? we had all these stories in the Song of Solomon. It's like you're giving all of these stories to a person who actually existed, and some of the stories might have a kernel of truth in them.
Right.
And that's what's happening here.
Sure. And I think it was important for them to write a kernel of truth, because part of this whole endeavor to write Daniel by these people that were writing this 400 years later, or bringing these together 400 years later, whatever the case was, it was to instill some sense of pride in the Israeli community, in the Hebrew community. You know, like that's what their whole point of this was. It feels like.
Right. So they had to have believable parts in order for the people to be like, yeah, that tracks with what I know that happened 400 years ago or whatever.
I mean, that's how you do propaganda, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The best lie has the hint of truth.
Yeah, definitely.
So with regard to the interpretation of the dream, okay?
Yep.
The Chaldean Empire, represented by the head of gold, the Medo-Persian, then the Macedonian or Grecian, and then the Roman, okay, from top to bottom.
Sure.
Okay. The Roman, which should break every other kingdom into pieces, but which in its last stage should be divided into 10 kingdoms, represented by the 10 toes of the image. Okay. Right. So here's the problem with that. That didn't happen.
Right.
So the Babylonian Empire stood for 66 years. The Medo-Persian Empire, and by Medo, I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. It's the Medes. Okay. It's the Persians and the Medes combined.
Okay.
All right. So the Medo-Persian Empire stood for 208 years. Wow. The Grecian Empire stood for 185 years. The Roman Empire stood for more than 500 years.
Sure.
Liberal commentators do not believe that the fourth kingdom is Rome. They say it's Greece because they separate the Medes and the Persians. So they would say the head is the Chaldeans. The next one is the Medes. The next one is the Persians. And the next one, instead of being Macedonia or Greek, it would just be Rome.
Got it.
Okay. So they're like, no, it's Rome. Not Rome, it's Greece. Okay. And that the second and the third kingdoms are Media and Persia, respectively, instead of the Medo-Persian empire as a whole. So I got those all mixed up, but what the fuck ever.
Sure.
The point is, we interpret it one way and Christians interpret it another way. And either way, it didn't happen. So it really doesn't fucking matter.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
They interpret this way because they believe it was impossible. Liberals like me and you interpret it this way because they believe it was impossible for Daniel to predict the rise of these empires.
Right.
Which it was impossible for him to predict the rise of these empires.
Because he doesn't even exist. So
right.
That's
Exactly.
Right.
So whatever, dude. All right. So I'm going to read a verse. It's chapter 2, verse 44.
Okay.
In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it itself will endure forever. Okay. Now, given that Roman history provides no fulfillment of this federation of kings, this prophecy must still be in the future.
Got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Since the fall of the Roman Empire, there has never been a world-dominating empire equal to Rome. Christians believe that the Roman Empire, in some form or another, will be revived under the leadership of the final fallen dictator, the Antichrist.
Which is why the United States gets kind of thrown into this mix a lot, right here.
Yeah.
This is the reason. Okay. Because we often get this attributed to our rise in power, our place in history.
We are clearly the force that is combining the world into one. We are that horrible nation. We're not Roman, but we also do get compared to the Roman Empire quite often.
Yeah.
Usually in a negative light.
Right.
And for good reason.
Yep.
And I would say I don't believe in any of this, but if anybody's the fucking Antichrist, it's definitely Trump.
I mean, look, the way I view this is that in modern history, in the now, in the right here and now, right? This plays very well into the hands of people who are the apocalyptic people in Christianity, right? Like they
it's
love
always the end
they
times.
love the doom and gloom. They love the end of times. They love the fact that the figureheads in our politicians can be related to biblical things, and so they love to compare and contrast these two things that they have learned about the Bible, right? And it just makes it that much more relevant to people today and that much more scary. So like when you can scare people into believing that these things in the Bible were written about today's politicians in our country and specifically, you are able to that much more effectively scare your parishioners.
Exactly.
And that's why we hear that a lot, I feel.
Yep. You're not wrong. All right. Chapter 3 is the furnace.
Yes.
Okay. There is an obvious link between Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 2 and the giant structure he made in chapter 3.
Okay.
It seems that Nebuchadnezzar deliberately made an entire statue of gold as if to say that the day of his reign and authority would never end. So in the dream, only the head was of gold.
Right.
And God was like, that's because you're going to get it. You're strong and good and pretty, but you're not lasting forever. Bye.
Right. Yeah.
And he's like, I'll show you.
I'll make a whole fucking statue of gold.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
Contrary to God's declared plan as revealed in his dream.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Within Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom were people of many races, languages, and religions. In a plan to create greater unity among these people, Nebuchadnezzar made a huge image as a national religious symbol and demanded that all citizens, great and small, bow before it. He set up the image in open plain country where it could be seen from afar. So that's why it was so big.
Right.
He wanted it to be seen by all his people.
Sure.
Okay. The image was more like a stylized obelisk rather than a normal statue, being 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. Totally a phallic
right.
symbol.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Being so large, it was likely not made of solid gold, but probably wood overlaid with gold, which was a common method of construction at that time. And I think I even said that while we were reading it.
You did. And I'm just going to point this out one more time here. We are talking about something that people wrote about 400 years after the fact, and we don't actually know probably that this thing actually existed.
Right.
Other than the account in Daniel, right?
Exactly.
So it's not... This is
that's not necessarily true. They have found some large, giant structures that they postulate could be that statue.
Okay.
Because it's like made of, I want to say like petrified wood or some shit. Clearly it wouldn't have the gold covering on it anymore.
Right.
But there have been things found that are like, maybe this is the... So I don't know. Do with that what you will. So Nebuchadnezzar called all the officials, right? So I'm going to read a verse. Chapter 3, verse 2. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. And I remember when we were reading that, we were like, what the fuck is a satrap? Whatever. I guess it's an official of some sort.
Got it.
Because all the other guys were officials, right?
Right.
So a satrap was a governor of a province in the ancient Persian and Median empires, and in some of their successor empires. The term satrap is a Greek transliteration of an old Iranian word, which means protector of the kingdom or keeper of the province.
Okay.
It refers to a specific category of public officials. Okay, so yeah, we were right. It is an official, but it just was another word for it.
Got it.
And borrowed from, the language that came before it.
Right. I gotcha.
I'm going to read another verse here.
Before you do that, real quick, I did want to point out, I did do a quick search about the statue from Nebuchadnezzar, and there's not any historical account of it outside of the Bible. It's not to say that there couldn't have been something similar, but there is no historical record written down anywhere else about it, and it is often thought that it was just used as a symbolic or literary device. So
that makes sense.
But that's just quick search, just curious, because I was curious. I
will get into some stuff that we actually have found that is in museums today.
Okay.
That is not that.
Right. So, okay. Sure.
Which I always find interesting when people and things do exist.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
that's neat.
Yeah.
Okay, so chapter 3, verse 5 reads, "As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up."
Right.
Okay, so the use of the Aramaic words for lyre, psaltery, and symphony, which those words are not in our translation. Right. Lyre is, but psaltery and symphony are not.
Okay.
But in the earlier book, they actually are those words.
Okay.
So they suggest that the book of Daniel was written hundreds of years after the time of Daniel, as these particular words are borrowed from Greek words. And Daniel did not really have these words at his disposal in the 6th century BCE, and they did not come into the Hebrew vocabulary until the 3rd century BCE.
So this is part of our ability to place the account.
How a thing is written, the words used.
At a later date, at least. So that's interesting. Okay.
Because when they know a thing that they shouldn't know,
right,
that doesn't mean that they're brilliant, and it means that they're post-dating.
Yeah, exactly.
Backdating.
Right.
Yeah. All right, so let's read a couple more verses here. Chapter 3, verses 23 and 24. "And these 3 men, finally tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, 'Hey, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?' They replied, 'Certainly, your majesty,'" because he saw 4, right? So the Septuagint, and that's the Greek translation, says in Daniel chapter 3, verse 24, that Nebuchadnezzar's attention was caught when he heard the men singing praises within the furnace. So he heard them singing.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So I just thought that was an interesting tidbit. Didn't answer any questions, but, neither did the tidbit about the Chaldeans.
Sure.
I just like to insert interesting things when I find them.
Yeah.
Okay. And here we're going to get into the thing that I read, or that I discussed about the fire being mentioned in Isaiah.
Yeah.
Okay. So Isaiah chapter 43, verses 1 and 2. "But now this is what the Lord says. He who created you, Jacob, he who formed you, Israel, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior."
Okay.
So that is supposed to be foretelling, like, oh my God, and then it came true in Daniel. What? And I'm like, what about the water part?
Right.
So anyway, whatever. That concludes chapter 3. Let's move into chapter 4.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that one is the king's madness.
Okay.
So chapter 4, verse 5 reads, "I had a dream that made me afraid. As I was lying in bed, the images and visions that passed through my mind terrified me." There is a note that this is not the same dream as from Daniel chapter 2.
Right.
Like, remember we had a question about it and we were like, but he didn't tell him. Oh, wait, no, it's a different dream. For sure, it's not the same dream.
Okay. Yeah.
So, verse 8 reads, "Finally, Daniel came into my presence and I told him the dream. He is called Belteshazzar after the name of my God, and the spirit of the holy gods is in him."
I'm going to just stop here for just a moment, because the fact that it is not the same dream kind of calls into question the validity of a lot of the stories, because we're talking about multiple accounts of things where Nebuchadnezzar literally starts saying that this God Yahweh is the most powerful, the most right, the most correct God on the planet, right?
He keeps getting taught that God is great, God is good.
How many times does it take him to learn the same fucking thing over and over again?
I do have an answer to that. Okay. I'm not there yet, though.
Is he hardening Nebuchadnezzar's heart too?
No.
Just like Pharaoh, or what?
No, it's not that.
Okay.
I will get to it.
All right.
Okay. So before Daniel interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the king considered the Babylonian deity Bel his god.
Sure.
Okay. By referring to his god when he named Dude, and by saying, he is called Belshazzar after the name of my God, and the spirit of the holy gods is in him. So by referring to his God, he is indicating that what he saw previously with Daniel and the 3 Hebrew young men, it was enough to impress him, but not enough to convert him. So he's like, I recognize that your God is great. He is a great God indeed, and I do celebrate him, and I do recognize that you guys get a free pass and nobody's going to fuck with you because I recognize your God. He's not my God, though.
I call bullshit here, though, a little bit. Like, it doesn't feel like this is like a congruent tale. Like, this is not like coming together for me.
No, it's not. But I think that is a fair argument. I will accept that as an explanation within the confines of this whole bullshit story.
All right.
Like, that tracks. You know what I mean? Because you can see, like, it's like criticizing a company that you don't work for, right? Or singing the praises of your company's arch nemesis. Like, if I work for Coke, right? And I'm like, well, I work for Coke and this is the best. But I do recognize that Pepsi makes some decent products. I really like their cherry Pepsi drink.
Sure.
Right?
Right.
You recognize that they're contributing some great stuff. You still work for Coke, though.
Right.
So that's the analogy that I made in my mind.
Okay.
He's not converted. He's not like, your drink is so fucking great, I'm going to quit my job at Coke and I'm going to go move over to work for Pepsi.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
So I don't know. It felt okay to me.
Sure.
Okay. So remember how the king goes totally nuts and thinks he's an animal?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's an actual thing that can happen.
Really?
What? Yeah.
Wow.
I had to look this shit up.
Okay.
I was like, nuh-uh. Okay. So zoanthropy is a monomania in which a person believes himself changed into an animal and acts like one. Now, that is now called clinical lycanthropy, which, werewolf comes from this word, right? Is a rare psychiatric syndrome that involves a delusion that the affected person can transform into, has transformed into, or is a non-human animal. Okay. Its name is associated with the mythical condition of lycanthropy, a supernatural affliction in which humans are said to physically shapeshift into werewolves. Okay. So that's where the term lycanthrope comes from.
Got it.
Is this ailment where people believe that they are animals.
Right.
Okay. The term is used by researchers mostly in the broader sense of transformation into animals in general. That, strictly speaking, is described by terms therianthropy or zoanthropy.
Got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but then there's the specific thing that he thought he was, a psychological disorder in which the human believes themselves to be a bovine, which is boanthropy.
Interesting.
Right?
The fact that there are words for these things is also interesting.
And
to me.
Moreover, would you like some modern day examples?
Sure. Yeah.
I did. All right. So now I am going to read a couple of news reports. Okay. Because fuck me, this is interesting. Okay. On August 15th, 2016, so 2016, Martin County, Florida Sheriff's Office deputies found a 19-year-old male on top of a bloodied 59-year-old male gnawing on his face, eating pieces of flesh, and making growling sounds.
Holy shit.
Officers tased, repeatedly kicked, and ultimately required a police dog's assistance in subduing the 19-year-old.
Damn.
Inside the garage of the home on Southeast Kokomo Lane, just north of the Palm Beach County line, deputies found a 53-year-old woman beaten, bloodied, and unresponsive. Ultimately, both the 59-year-old man and the 53-year-old woman would die from their injuries. This dude was eating them live.
Right.
In the weeks ahead of this incident, the 19-year-old had told family members he believed he was either half man, half horse, or half man, half dog. Clinical psychologist Dr. Philip Resnick later assessed the 19-year-old as having clinical lycanthropy. This was 2016.
Wow.
Yeah. All right, here's another one. Ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
A 20-year-old man was admitted to a mental hospital due to his increasingly agitated and erratic behaviors. During his initial evaluation, he was guarded and preoccupied. He had no previous psychiatric history. Over the next few days, he displayed increasingly psychotic animal-like behaviors. These behaviors included howling loudly, running abruptly, and walking on all fours, which is known as quadrobics.
Interesting.
Quadrobics.
Yeah.
He appeared to be internally stimulated. When asked about these behaviors, he was initially evasive, but eventually admitted that he believed he was a werewolf and would periodically transform into a wolf. He started believing this after having visions of the devil years before and reported hearing random voices. The patient was started on ziprasidone, and his symptoms gradually responded, and his animal-like behaviors eventually ceased altogether. All right, one more, and then we're done. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
A 25-year-old man was sent for treatment during a period of excessive hand-washing, irritable behavior, decreased sleep, and acting like a buffalo, as you do. The patient, you're laughing at a medical condition.
No, I'm actually laughing because it reminded me immediately.
Man on a buffalo.
Yes.
We'll have to link that.
Right. So there's this whole series. Sorry, I have to go into this for just a second. Mm-hmm. There's a whole series of stupid videos on YouTube. If you look up "man on a buffalo," there's like a whole series of them, and you can write me a hate mail letter later. But you'll watch them all, I promise.
Yes, and you'll get that earworm stuck in your head for the rest of your life. Right. Man on a buffalo.
Right.
All right, so this dude thought he was not a man on a buffalo, but an actual buffalo.
Got it. Okay. Right.
The patient reported that he had engaged in sexual activity with his buffalo.
Oh my God.
And believed that buffalo cells had entered his body and were transforming him into a buffalo.
Oh my gosh.
He began obsessively washing his hands and genitals in order to avoid the transition. He saw himself as having buffalo body parts and became preoccupied about his appearance.
Okay.
He then began to act as a buffalo by nodding his head, walking on all fours, and seeking out hay and grass to eat.
Wow.
I mean, he was all in. He really thought he was a fucking buffalo.
Right.
He was ultimately diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder and body dysmorphic disorder with delusional beliefs. He was treated with fluoxetine and risperidone, and after 6 months of pharmacotherapy, his body dysmorphia and hand washing were both reduced.
Got it.
Doesn't say it went away.
Right.
Just that it was reduced.
Sure.
So this madness that he had, it's actually a thing that exists.
Right.
So there might be a ring of truth to that, because also during the time that this story says that this is supposed to have happened, there is no record anywhere of this 7-year time period that he was supposed to have undergone this madness.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, kind of like Agatha Christie has like a missing year that like everybody's like, what happened during that year? Where were you?
Nebuchadnezzar has a missing 7 years, huh?
Yes. Okay. And speaking of which, it was 7 years.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But again, we're writing about this 400 years later. So
sure.
That probably started becoming lore of some type. And it could have been based on some sort of fact or event.
Well, I mean, let's think this out though. Dude starts acting like an animal, right?
Right.
He was like, maybe there was some guy, not Daniel, but maybe some guy that they, liked a lot and kind of put some character value on him and like wrote him as Daniel sometimes.
Yeah, sure.
Right. And let's say that this guy's like, how can we make it to where this king is not crazy?
Right.
Or like the craziness has a reason for him walking on all fours and eating grass.
Right.
And so maybe it started during that time, like they wrote down like God made this happen. And then like later, 400 years later, they like further embellished.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know. I thought it was so cool. This shit actually is a mental condition.
Right.
All right. Chapter 5. This is the handwriting on the wall. When we come to Daniel chapter 5, Nebuchadnezzar is no longer the king of Babylon.
Right.
The fuck?
Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar died after a 43-year reign. Okay, so how did it go from him to Belshazzar? Like, the fuck, right?
Yeah.
All right, here's a little quick list of who it all went through.
Okay.
His son, Merodach, described in 2 Kings chapter 25 and Jeremiah chapter 52. This dude ruled for only 2 years when he was assassinated by his brother-in-law Neriglissar because his rule was arbitrary and licentious.
Okay.
So Neriglissar, who had just, killed his brother, was like, me. He is mentioned in Jeremiah chapter 39. He ruled for 4 years until he died a natural death.
Okay.
And his son, Laborasorshad, only a child and of diminished mental capacity, maybe he was mentally impaired much like his grandfather.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Maybe it ran in the fucking family.
Right.
As mental illnesses often do.
Right.
Okay. So this weirdo kid, he ruled for only 9 months when he was beaten to death by a gang of conspirators.
Holy shit.
Right?
Yeah.
The conspirators appointed Nabonidus, one of their gang, to be king.
This is a lot of fucking people to go through.
That's how, what's his name? What's dude's name? Daniel. That's how Daniel was still alive.
Got it. Because it was a
these
quick
kings
succession.
were like boom, 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 one after the other.
Right,
yeah.
right.
Okay, so the conspirators appointed Nabonidus, one of their gang, to be king. He ruled until Cyrus the Persian conquered Babylon.
Okay.
During the last part of his reign, however, Nabonidus lived in Arabia, and he left the conduct of the kingdom of Babylon to his oldest son, Belshazzar.
Okay.
The Nabonidus cylinder, these are things that actually exist, was discovered in 1854 and is now displayed in the British Museum in London.
Huh.
Yeah, very cool. Highly recommend y'all check it out. It tells some interesting things, and just, I love historical artifacts.
Yeah, sure.
Okay?
Yeah.
According to Babylonian records, Belshazzar became co-regent in the 3rd year of Nabonidus' reign in 553 BCE.
Okay.
And this is actual things that happened.
Right,
okay?
right, yeah.
He continued in that capacity till the fall of Babylon in 539 BCE.
Okay.
It is most likely that at that time of Daniel chapter 5, Nabonidus had gone out to fight the Medo-Persian army and had been already captured. Those armies now surrounded Babylon and were looking for a way into the strongly defended city. Okay?
Got it.
Yeah. Belshazzar was not afraid of the siege surrounding the city. He was confident because of Babylon's impressive defenses.
Okay.
So remember, this was in this last chapter we read, they're partying it up.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Yeah. So he was confident because of Babylon's impressive defenses, a system of inner and outer walls and moats that made the city very secure. And he had vast supplies. So he's like, whatever, we're good.
Right.
He was safe inside his palace partying it up while a hostile army surrounded the city.
Got it.
So chapter 5, verse 7 reads, the king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. Then he said to those wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the 3rd highest ruler in the kingdom. Remember, we were like, 3rd? That's random.
Yeah.
The fuck?
So really it was 2nd because they're referring to the fact that he's kind of second in charge, but this other king is over there somewhere
in Arabia.
Else.
Yep. That's exactly right.
Okay.
Belshazzar offered the interpreter of the dream the 3rd place in the kingdom because the real king was Nabonidus. That's the one.
Yep.
And his son Belshazzar ruled as the 2nd in the kingdom. Belshazzar couldn't give away the 2nd place in the kingdom because he was the 2nd.
Right.
So the best he had to offer was 3rd place. And now we're like, oh, that makes sense.
Right.
Okay. In October of 539 BCE, the Persian king Cyrus advanced into Lower Mesopotamia and, leaving Babylon till last, conquered and occupied the surrounding territory. Seeing which way the wind was blowing, Nabonidus of Babylon was like, I'm out, peace, bye.
Right, yeah.
He deserted his city, leaving it in the charge of his son Belshazzar, which that's what we talked about.
Right.
Okay. So he's
Real nice.
like, yeah, these dudes are coming. I have a meeting in Arabia. I have to go.
Yeah.
Okay. Cyrus conquered Babylon by diverting the flow of the Euphrates into a nearby swamp.
And I remember hearing about that from a previous book that we were reading.
Yeah.
It might have been Kings or whatever.
One of the, one of them.
Yeah.
I don't know which one either, but yeah, we did read about this.
Yeah.
This lowered the level of the river, so his troops marched through the water and under the river gates. The bronze gates of the inner walls had been left inexplicably unlocked. And everybody gasps and says, God did it. Sure. The taking of Babylon was as bloodless and effortless as Daniel chapter 5 implies.
Okay.
So, yeah. Christians believe this was exactly what God predicted in Isaiah chapter 45 and Jeremiah chapter 51, that this even was put in writing 200 years before it happened. So let's read what it says and be like, okay.
Okay.
Okay, so Isaiah chapter 45, verses 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay?
Yep.
This is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of, to subdue nations before him, and to strip kings of their armor, to open doors before him so that gates will not be shut. I will go before you and will level the mountains. I will break down gates of bronze and cut through bars of iron. I will give you hidden treasures, riches stored in secret places, so that you may know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who summons you by name. For the sake of Jacob, my servant, of Israel, my chosen, I summon you by name and bestow on you a title of honor, though you do not acknowledge me. Okay?
Again,
reaching.
Right. And the fact that this was written so much later, I feel like more and more as we get further into the Bible and further into time with regard to the religions of, Judaism and then following that Christianity, that we're taking these instances to where we're writing things to make things happen.
Right.
Like, to make them sound like they're coming true. Like,
where exactly did we stop having things happen, and where exactly did we start backfilling?
Right. And that's ultimately the question, right? Is how much of this is just making this work for you.
Right.
So
Yeah. So there's no way I could ever believe any of this. Right. But let's read what happened in Jeremiah chapter 51. Okay?
Sure. Okay.
Verses 56, 57, and 58. A destroyer will come against Babylon. Her warriors will be captured and their bows will be broken. For the Lord is a God of retribution. He will repay in full. I will make her officials and wise men drunk, her governors, officers, and warriors as well. They will sleep forever and not awaken, declares the King, whose name is the Lord Almighty. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Babylon's thick wall will be leveled and her high gates set on fire. The peoples exhaust themselves for nothing. The nation's labor is only fuel for the flames.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, and again, if I recall correctly, some of the things in Isaiah and Jeremiah might have been written later as well, right? It's not so like there's questions about a lot of that too, and not only that, but it feels again. I'm just going to say it one more time that it feels very much like they're filling space to make these things more plausible and more realistic, right? Like that's what this fiction is ultimately about, is making this more real.
Finding old prophecies, stapling it together, and then writing them having come true.
Right.
Yeah. That's what the Bible is to me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how it feels. So do we have anything else to cover today with regard to the Q&A?
That is fucking it.
Well, that is a long episode. We're over an hour just in the regular meat of it. So
I'm so sorry.
If you stuck around for the whole thing, thank you.
I was so interested in all of it.
No, I was too. It was very good information. I appreciated all I appreciated it all. It was good to learn those things, and I think it helps kind of fill in a lot of the gaps and makes it a little bit more clear as to what's going on. So that was a good episode, I felt like.
I feel like too.
I hope.
Well, I hope everybody likes it and poop on the ones that don't. Just kidding. I don't poop on anybody. No.
I might poop on Trump. I mean, I'm just saying, if I had to choose somebody to poop on,
I don't want him that close to my ass.
That's a good point. I would throw poop at him, though.
I would throw poop at him.
Maybe,
I would have a bag over my hands, and then I would pick up poop.
Like, I'm just imagining him at like a carnival with his head through one of those things where you
splat. I'm for it.
Anyway. All right. So that was our Q&A for this Saturday.
Q&A Saturday.
And we will be back tomorrow with
Patreon.
And then I will get the weekly wrap up together and out. And then we'll be back on Monday with
Daniel chapter 6.
We'll see you then.
Bye.